All right, everybody. I think we'll get rolling here. It's 4 o'clock. On a personal note here, I just wanted to let you guys know I'm doing this from home today because during storms, unfortunately, the club where I normally record, we have a tendency to lose our Wi-Fi down there. So I did not want to end up dropping the connection on you guys. I am home. I do have 2 small kids, and there might be some background noise. So I apologize in advance for that. I have them watching a movie. Hopefully, that'll keep them as quiet as possible. So today we're going to go over some new in-home workouts that I'll be dropping in the Google files later. You guys can check them out there as well if you want to follow along, or if you want to keep doing the first set of workouts for the rest of this month, that's completely fine as well. Just want to have some options for you guys. And then we're going to move on and talk about some core activation and corrections for core dysfunction, basically. All right, so our new workout, and I'll have a video on the next slide demonstrating all of these, and that's also posted on our strength and conditioning social media page for Instagram if you want to go check that out as well. So the new workout will be a goblet squat. You can do that holding a dumbbell or a kettlebell. In the video, I do kettlebells, but you can use dumbbells if you do not have kettlebells. Working on that 10 to 12 rep range again. Then we're going to move on to a clamshell, which is a banded exercise. We're going to do that for 10 to 12 again. Like we talked about last week, our progressions, work your way up to that 12th rep, and then add weight or add resistance as we go. We're then going to move on to our pressing section, which will be a kneeling vertical press. Same rep range, 10 to 12, and then our pull-ups, 10 to 12. Side planks. So we're going to change out of a front plank and move more into the oblique section. Side planks start around 30 seconds. If that's too easy for you, you can obviously put that up or drop it down depending on your current state of fitness. Then we'll do a banded rotation. If you have an in-home gym, you can also use cables. Cable rotation will be the same thing. So let's watch this video real quick. So this is a single goblet held up in front, feet about shoulder width, toes pointed out just slightly. Inhale on the way down, exhale on the way up. Push the bell slightly forward. It just gives you a nice counterbalance, keep you in good squat form. This is called a double goblet. The progression we use to get people ready for working on Olympic bars. Will be our clamshell. You'll take one of your ankle bands. You're going to go just below or just above your knees. Lying on our side. Soles of my feet are in line with my spine. I raise that leg up and out to the side. Kneeling press. Core is tight. Drive that dumbbell straight up through the ceiling. Bicep covers the ear at the top. This is an assisted pull-up, so I'm using a single band that just takes a little bit of weight off of me, makes it a little bit easier. Driving that chest up and out. Standard pull-up. And then if you're a little more advanced, we could start throwing some weights on. Dumbbell between the leg. Same deal. Side plank. I like to point my hand to the ceiling. That just keeps me in a nice straight line. And then our cable rotation, taking it straight across to the side. And again, that 3 to 4 sets will be a pretty good range. Okay, so we talked about progressions and regressions last week, so I just want to show you what some of the progressions and regressions for each of those exercises would be if they have one. So for our goblet squats, the progression would be into a barbell front squat. There's the 2 different positions here. This is called a zombie or a Frankenstein grip. This one's just a little bit easier on the wrist, and then this is called the hook grip, where you're actually hooking a few fingers onto the bar. It's a more advanced way of holding it, and it's just a little bit harder on your wrist, really. Either one is perfectly acceptable. And the regression for the goblet squat would obviously be just a bodyweight squat. Keep the arms up in front. Again, this just adds a nice little counterweight and keeps you balanced and keeps that body weight centered. All right, so our kneeling press, the progression would be onto a dumbbell press off of a bench. And then from that, we'll be into a barbell press. And then our regression would be what we call a landmine press. Landmine, you would obviously need to have an Olympic bar to do this, but these are the two positions that we do it in. This is kneeling position first, and then that progresses to the standing position. It's a great exercise to teach pressing, and especially vertical pressing, and done in a safe manner. And this will all come in just showing him right here with his back, how his back is nice and flat at the top of this press. When we start talking about the core stuff later on in the presentation, this is kind of something I'll be referring to as this position here, that nice neutral spine. You never want to have your back arched. Okay, so on to the function of core progressions. Most common cause of back pain during exercise is improper core activation, and a leading cause of back injury, whether it be during sport or during your exercise, is going to be improper core activation. It's not something that's talked about a ton in the field, unless you're dealing with high-level athletes, and it starts to come in play a little bit more. It's very, very important for people who are just in the general population to understand this stuff as well. When I started working for Centercourt 10 years ago or so, I didn't spend a ton of time on core work. I mean, you know, we did our planks and our crunches and our sit-ups and stuff. Wasn't really versed on how important it is to lifting as I should have been, because it's just not really taught. Once I started working for Centercourt, obviously, it was mainly just tennis. So I started seeing a ton of back injuries in our players, and really just had to just do some digging, reaching out to fellow colleagues and people in the field, and really start to learn about ways to reduce those risks. I mean, for a tennis player during like a 2-hour clinic, they could rotate to 2,000 times, which is just a ton of stress on the back. And the serving position, if you've ever watched tennis, when they do that serve, that puts a ton of strain on the low back as well, particularly on their dominant side. So if they're right-handed, the lower right side of their back is a ton of stress. And then all workouts should have a section dedicated to any core activation. If there's any athletes in the group, I saw a couple names that I recognize today. Every workout starts with some sort of core progression, breathing work, pelvic tilts and stuff that we're going to go over here. It's just very, very, very important to any exercise and any sport, really. So the basics of core activation. This gives us a little bit of a visual in terms of what of the different positions we're going to be talking about. And any exercise done in standing or kneeling positions will require strong core to reduce the risk of injury. Also, any of the core exercises themselves, and translating that into sport as well. Try to hammer it in enough times that it becomes second nature for athletes to maintain that nice tight core. So what does this look like? This is just a little bit of anatomy here. We're not going to go super in depth, but this is just the pelvis. This is your spine, obviously, and our legs down here. And this is the bone, the muscles surrounding this bone that we're going to be talking about. Okay, this is the pelvis bone. This is technically the ilium part of it. And when we have a nice neutral spine, this bone will be nice straight up and down. When we have an anterior tilt, which is the position that's going to get us into trouble, the tips of the wings here are actually pointed forward. So this is a very common position that I see with a lot of my athletes. I'm sure you have seen friends who kind of stand like this. They'll tend to walk almost up on their tippy toes when they walk as well. And people in this position, most of us are to some degree, just because of the amount of sitting and stuff we do, will complain about having tight hamstrings. And it's actually not the hamstrings, which are back here, that are tight. It's actually the muscle up in our hip in front that actually pulls the pelvis forward. And then that puts the hamstrings on stretch just when you're standing. So they're not technically tight, they're just on stretch because of your posture. The posterior pelvic tilt, we don't see this in terms of posture a lot. Might see some kids walking around, but it's not super common. This is the more common of the positions. All right, so how do we correct it? The basic exercise that I always start out teaching is just called a pelvic tilt. You start on the floor with a nice little arch on your back. So there's space between your back and the floor. You take a deep breath in. On the exhale, we're going to drive the pelvis down, push that belly button as close to the floor as we can get it. You can do this in two different ways. You can do it with your breathing in on the out, down on the up, or more commonly, I like to hold it and then have the athletes breathe for 10 seconds, maintaining that pressure. Sometimes I'll teach it initially with their hands underneath their back, so their fingers will be touching this position down here. And then that way there's a little bit of a tactile response in terms of you're feeling how much pressure you're putting on your hands. And you can feel when that pressure starts to go away. It's usually going to be on the inhale. People will lose that tension. So it's a great way to teach holding that pressure for a full 10 breaths. Okay, so this is like your base level in terms of correcting that anterior pelvic tilt position. Continuation on this, we would go into leg progressions, basically. The first position here, we're just taking the leg out on the inhale and then exhale back in. The key on this, and this becomes an exercise in itself, even though it's technically under the activation phase, is keeping that back flat. So as she would exhale, this knee would come back up. And then on next inhale, this leg would go out. We never want to have two legs out at the same time. And again, maintaining that back position. If you lose the back position, you just limit the amount that your foot is going out until you progress and get a little bit stronger and a little bit better in terms of activating that core, that you fully extend the legs out. Once you're able to make it to full extension, then we would progress over to the picture here on the right, which is what we call dead bug with tension. And basically that means I'm going to have a band over my head anchored to anything in your house. And then on the inhale, that leg would go out, exhale, leg in. And this just increases the amount of tension that's going on in the stomach and makes it a little bit harder for us to maintain that low back position, which is the key in what we want. Come on, next slide. And then we have a full dead bug. So this is basically the most advanced core activation that we're going to be able to do. We call this the dead bug because it looks like in the first position, a dead bug on the floor. So you would start in that open position, a little bit of space between your back and the floor, take the deep breath in. On the exhale, we close that down. First inhale, we went right arm, left leg, then exhale together. And then on the next inhale, right arm, left leg. We would just alternate those back and forth for a full 10 breaths. Again, we want to maintain that low back position. The minute you start to feel space in there, we stop. So maybe on our first set doing this, after we've done the tension dead bugs, only taking the arm to 45 and we're only taking the knee out. So that it would be like the heel would be coming down to the ground. That's a way to make it a little bit easier and a little bit less stress, and then eventually progressing to this full on dead bug. And we're going to talk a little bit later about some core exercises, like good ones and the bad ones. And until you can master this exercise with your back completely flat, there's a whole slew of exercises that you should not be doing. And we'll talk about that in a minute. But until you can get this, you should be sticking with planks and side planks and things that are static, not a lot of motion. So once we've mastered that, we'll move into the standing stuff. So this is a pelvic tilt with the rib cage closure. I like to do this one on a wall or against a rack. Start in the open position. We can see here there's a little bit of space between him and the wall. We take a deep breath in. On the exhale, that pelvis goes back and the rib cage comes down. You can notice his shirt in terms of where it's sitting here versus here, because that rib cage dropped and his pelvic tilt happened. There's no space between you and the wall. We're just going to hold that, breathing that 10 breaths in through the nose, out through the mouth, nice and strong, maintaining the pressure against the wall. We could progress this by starting with our hands out at 90 degrees and then raising them above our head. Again, that just increases tension on that core and it makes it harder to maintain that position as we progress this. All right, so This is what a good position, or sorry, this is what a bad position looks like. We can see there's the arch there, and his rib cage is up and out. All right, and in the proper position, cage is down, pelvis is tilted back. So no matter the exercise, this is what we want to look like at the start and the finish. All right, the reason is, I want you to picture this guy is holding an Olympic bar. So it's directly above his head. This is in bad position, right? We can see he has an arch in his back. Weight, just like lightning, wants to find its way to the floor, right? So if I'm holding this bar above my head, that weight is going to be transferred through my hands, through my arms, down through my shoulders, and it gets stuck right there. So the minute you have your back arched in any position, or even if he had a barbell on his back and he's standing there getting ready to squat, if we have that arch in the back, all of that weight is going to sit right there, hold. And that's where the strain, that's where injury can occur. But if I'm in the proper position, I have my rib cage down, I have my pelvis tilted backwards, weight can travel straight down and all the way into my heels. And so that's what we want weight to do when we're loaded, when we're bearing weight, when we're holding a barbell, when we're holding a kettlebell, holding a dumbbell, whatever it is, we want that weight to safely transfer straight down the floor. That's what this position is here. In terms of a plank, this would be obviously our bad position here, and this would be the good position. You're doing planks, besides just maintaining this nice flat back, you should be actively pulling that rib cage and actively tucking that pelvis every time. So your glutes should be kind of squeezed, nice and flexed, and your stomach should be flexed as well. It's not just a passive holding of this position, because if you're passively holding this position, eventually you're going to end up in this first bad position just by accident. And so actively thinking about what you're doing during the exercise, holding that position, squeezing the glutes nice and tight, it makes the exercise harder. It makes it safer. Safety is always the #1 priority whenever we're doing any sort of exercise. So safe core work, maintaining that tucked and tightened position will help ensure your back will stay safe during core exercises. And we should limit the amount of spinal bending that we have during core stuff. So crunches and sit-ups and stuff, it's not that they're bad. We'll talk a little bit more about why they're not great in a second. You just want to limit them. And if we're doing them, something like let's say a sit-up, everyone knows what a basic sit-up looks like. If I'm going to do some anterior bending of my spine, sitting up, I want to make sure I counter that with an exercise where I'm opening it up, something like a Superman. Superman exercise is all fours, and you're basically raising your right arm and your left leg at the same time. It's the exact opposite of a dead bug. And what that does is that'll help activate the lower back muscles. So if you're doing crunches or if you're doing sit-ups, always make sure you have a low back exercise in there as well, just to offset each other, because we don't want to always be bending forward, bending forward, bending forward. All that's going to do is increase the possibility that we're in that bad position here. Right, the more I do that bending forward, the tighter this muscle is going to get, and the more the pelvis is going to tilt forward, and the more my back is going to arch, the bigger problems we'll see in your exercise. All right, and avoid exercises like butterfly kicks or anything with a straight leg due to increased strain on the low back. So this is what I was talking about before. So until you're able to do perfect dead bug, 10 reps with the breathing, I've added some weight to make it a little bit harder. Until you're able to master that, you should never do anything with a straight leg. This is one of my pet peeves. Obviously nobody's going to the gym right now. And those years ago when I didn't work in the industry and I would watch people work out with those like straight leg exercises, like I think back on it now and it's just, just killing your back. So, and the reason that is because of something called the So's paradox. So again, I'm not going to get super technical on this, but I just kind of want you to understand why we don't want to do this butterfly kick exercise or something like a jackknife. So this muscle is called the psoas. There's a major and a minor. This is the major here. You can see it connects directly on your spine. This is its origin, and then it inserts your leg, okay? So when you're walking, when my leg swings forward, this is one of the muscles that is going to work. When I'm standing, the origin is stable, right? Where the muscle starts is stable, and this leg is gonna start moving. The minute I drop on my back and start an exercise like this, the origin and the insertion flip. It's the only muscle in the body that does this. All of a sudden, my origin comes down here, right? Because of gravity, this is now being held in place. And then my insertion, where the motion is going to happen, can shift my spine, meaning it's going to pull my back off of the ground, put strain on that lower back. So unless, like this woman here, you're able to maintain that perfectly flat back while doing this exercise, you are actively hurting your low back. You're putting a tremendous amount of strain on it. So if you've ever been in any group I've ever coached, you will never have done an exercise like this. The closest thing we get to is something called a hollow hold. And that's just a way to teach this position here in a safe manner. We're never going to do anything with those straight legs. And especially in a group setting, even if I know I have one particular female athlete or male athlete that has the capacity to do this exercise, I am going to lack the ability to properly coach it for everyone because it's so advanced in terms of the position that the chances that someone else is going to end up hurt rise. And like we talked about with core exercises during the progression presentation last week, never want to go to failure on core, because as your core starts to get more tired, you lose that position. Right? And so maintaining that focus is just paramount to keeping the low back safe. So if you're at home and you're doing like a men's fitness or a women's fitness challenge, like the 60-day abs or the 30-day abs or something like that, and they've got a ton of exercises like this in, do yourself a favor, make sure you're able to do that full dead bug before you even attempt it. I've had so many athletes hurt themselves from doing these ab challenges. It just drives me crazy over the years. And I tell them at the beginning of it, don't do it. You're going to end up with a hurt back. They don't listen, and they end up a hurt back. So safe core exercises for all. And by for all, I mean everyone who has just the basic understanding of that tilt and the rib cage closure, because that is the basis. Again, A1, come into the first day of programming with me, you're learning a pelvic tilt and you're learning a rib cage closure. Happens right at the jump. Excuse me. Safe core exercises for all that are able to perform those two motions are going to be our planks, our side planks, pull-off presses, which is the ones that are in the workout from the first 2 weeks where you're standing and pressing a band out to tension. There's a varying amount of positions that you can do that in: kneeling, standing, open stance, closed stance, a whole bunch of different ways to do it. Limited rotations. We have rotations going on in this particular workout. But again, if you're in a sport where you're doing a ton of rotations, we want to limit that. If you're not in a sport, fine. Bridges, bird dogs, and Supermans. These are all low back exercises. So a bridge basically looks like the pelvic tilt to begin with, and then you drive your hips up the sky. A bird dog is exactly that. It's that kind of Superman kind of position that I talked about before, where you're on all fours, raising right arm and left leg. They call that bird dog because obviously that's what a bird dog does. It's pointing at an animal. And then the Superman is basically the bird dog. You're just in a prone, laying on your belly, basically. And then there's varying ways of doing that as well. So doing any of these exercises will be fine. And then obviously once you get a little more advanced in terms of your core strength and your core activation, you can move on and do more advanced things. Before we do the Q&A, actually, I just want to talk a little bit about why we do. I spend so much time on that pelvic tilt and that rib cage closure. We talked about it with the overhead press when I was showing that particular slide, kind of where that weight's going to end up sitting. And that translates to all of our lower body exercises as well, especially things like deadlifts, like squats, like trap bar deadlifts. I really don't allow athletes to really progress weight till they can demonstrate to me that they're able to do that pelvic tilt. We call it a tuck and tighten. If you've ever been in any of my groups, I say that 1,000 times every session. Tuck and tighten, tuck and tighten. And again, the reason is because if I'm holding 300 pounds in my hands on a deadlift and my back is arched, that weight is sitting directly in my low back. So until they're able to show me that they can make that pelvic tilt and that rib cage closure, that tuck and tighten, don't allow them to increase weight, basically past body weight. So anything over body weight, you need to be able to have that position hammered down. And that translates into all of our core stuff here. It translates into all of our lower body exercises. It translates into any exercise of the upper body where I'm standing or seated. That's where that weight is going to end, where that weight is going to end up sitting. For our pulling exercises, it's not so much of a big deal. Obviously, during a pull-up, you're going to be using a little bit of core. My legs are hanging, so I'm not really going to be able to hurt my back. Any sort of like dumbbell rowing or positions like that, again, you're a supported position. Like if you're using like a dumbbell row, you're going to be on a bench. So it's not as important there, but any of our upper body exercises where we're pressing, any lower body exercise, all of them, this is super, super important. And then obviously during any of our core exercises. So beyond that, let's move into Q&A. Okay, Ryan, if we were able to do a crunch or a sit-up, should the next exercise be the opposite, or does it not matter when you're during your workout? What do you recommend? Yeah, so it doesn't need to be directly after it. It needs to be in the exercise, or it needs to be in the rotation. With exercises that I've put in so far in terms of our workouts, our core they've all been static, meaning we're not getting any of that motion. But if in the future I do put in a like a crunch, let's say, or like a sit-up of some kind, I would immediately follow it with like a bird dog or a Superman. And again, it doesn't need to be immediately after. It should be within the rotation somewhere. Even honestly, a good way to do it would be to have the bird dog first and then go into the crunch, because I've at least activated my back and got those muscles kind of awake and ready to go. All right, so I'll let you guys take a minute or two here and see if anybody wants to dump another question on me. Son is really tall for his age. Are there any exercise I should avoid to protect his knees? Depending on his age, so I'll answer it this way. When I used to work with basketball teams, it would never really do squats or deadlifts. The only lower body exercise that I would really have them do would be a trap bar deadlift, and I would do it off of a raised platform. He's 12. Yeah, so he's still in that growing phase. So I would avoid anything that makes him feel uncomfortable in terms of his knees, and just make sure the form is absolutely spot on. All people are unfortunately at higher risk for knee problems and for low back problems as well. And if you're going to do something like a lunge, like a basic lunge with him, the way I teach that especially for kids who are a bit taller, is I'll actually put them with their toe against the wall. So if you're picturing like a static lunge, just that up and down motion with the one leg forward, one leg back, I would put their toe up against the wall. So when they go into the down position, that knee can never go forward enough to actually cause any pain, because it's going to hit the wall. That's a great way to teach them how to do like a proper lunging motion. And you can honestly do that for squats as well. That is something I've done in the past when I'm teaching kids, is teaching wall squats. So toes about 6 inches away from the wall and then squatting from that position. That just helps them keep their weight back on their heels to midfoot, which is where you want it. So in terms of particular exercises, anything is open for all people. It just, form just needs to be absolutely spot on. And if you have any particular questions about an exercise, feel free to email me and we can get a bit more in depth on that. It's Tim at centercourtclub.com. More. How much jump rope is good and how much is too much. So that really depends on the kid. So for me, I can't do a ton of jump roping. My calves are very developed. And the minute I start to jump rope, I immediately start getting pain in my calves. So it really depends on how your son is built. You know, I generally have kids jump rope as kind of like a warm up more than anything else, and making sure he's varying his landing position. So not just always like a double tap on the feet. Do this, you know, one side to the other, back and forth, give me a running position, give me single leg, and just vary that as he goes. And as long as he's not showing any pain, or he's not getting any sort of like arch pain in his feet, you know, you're pretty much good to go. Give it another couple seconds here. Hope everybody's staying safe. I'm starting to go a little bit crazy. My park got closed next door, so I can't even go out walking anymore with the kids. Getting a little wild. All right, guys, looks like nothing else is coming in. So we'll go ahead and wrap this up. Everybody stay safe. I hope you had a nice holiday, if that's your thing. And we'll see everybody next week. We're going to focus a little bit more next week on speed and agility drills and good ways for athletes and parents to kind of help each other in terms of what a good speed and agility workout should look like. So I will see you guys next week. And take care.